I wanted to look around YouTube at what sort of philosophy material other people were making. I found that epic rap battles get tens of millions of views, and apparently Leonardo DiCaprio is good for 1 million views. I was disappointed to see sexism alive and well. As usual, it's from a leftist. Why not books from good authors? Why are you singling out female? Why are you judging people by their gender? Why do you care what their gender is? You're not gender blind. It's like not being colorblind. This is just sexism. It's judging people by what their gender is. It's completely blatantly sexist. A video about World of Warcraft came up. It has nothing to do with philosophy, but it was actually pretty good. There were a bunch of Wisecrack edition videos. This one got 1.4 million views. But what really stood out to me was the philosophy of Antifa. You might hope for a neutral analysis which gives you information about what Antifa is like, but it's actually a propaganda video which advocates Antifa and tries to persuade people that they should see the world that way. It's not particularly philosophical. It's a political video, and it openly advocates violence. That's pretty off topic, so I made a separate video about it. Click here or find the link in the description below. Alright, now let's take a look at an actual philosophy-related video. This one's called A Day in the Life of a Philosophy Student.
The books I need for this module can be found in the library on campus, and any required journal articles can be easily accessed through my online library account.
Alright, the music is fake as hell. Are people really that happy all the time in class at university? I don't think so. I think it's presenting dishonestly an atmosphere that is not the actual mood of the students on a typical day. The music is overly happy. Like, even if most of the kids there are happy, they're not as happy as that music. So that was lame. The whole video is like that. It gets a bit annoying. They try to give the impression you don't have to buy textbooks. Everything you need is in the library. Really? I thought that a lot of the stuff was at the textbook store. That's usually how they do things. And then you can get all the required articles with his online account. What about non-required articles? Do you get to decide, I'm going to read this, I want to learn about this? Is that a thing? Or do you only ever read required articles? Do you just read what your teacher tells you and that's your whole life?
Lectures can be quite informal, and students are able to raise their hands and ask questions throughout, and in the 10-minute break in the middle of the lecture.
It's so informal that you have to raise your hand or wait for a break in order to ask a question. I'm not impressed. They give an overall impression that you have to ask a lot of questions in order to learn anything. That seems like a bad system because most students are pretty passive and just do what's required, which is something else they repeatedly emphasize in the video, is they just keep mentioning people doing what they're required to do. So which is it? Do the kids just do what they're required to do, or are they taking initiative, asking questions, and pursuing their own interests? Or is it just that they ask just enough questions in order to get by with the requirements?
Philosophy students don't have as many lectures as in other disciplines, so it's a good idea to talk through any questions you might have with the lecturer after the lecture is finished.
Wait, I thought we were raising our hand and asking questions during class, or at least during our 10-minute break that isn't a break, it's a question period. Do professors get annoyed when you ask them questions during their 10-minute break? Maybe they want a break, you know? Telling people they have to ask their professor a bunch of questions is awkward and difficult for a lot of people who don't want to interrupt the professor during his break. So this guy says you just ask your questions after class. So the class was not good enough to teach you the material, but you just go to him after class and then he helps you. Later on, it says that you ask them questions during office hours and also during your termly meetings. So it's sending really mixed messages. Apparently, you just ask them questions all the time, anytime. There's just so many ways, so it's all great. But to me, it says there isn't actually any effective way, so you keep trying to fill in the gaps with all these other things. Just ask the professor after class. If that's the standard thing, why aren't classes longer? That doesn't sound good.
My favourite place to study is the ERI building, the European Research Institute, which is also the home of the philosophy department. I like it in here because there are plenty of computers and workspaces.
He likes it because there's computers. Does he not have a laptop? His favorite place to study is not at home. Does he not like his home? Or is it just because this is a propaganda video for the university, so his favorite place has to be somewhere at the university, so he can praise how great the university is and how it offers computers? I'm pretty sure that a lot of the students really do have laptops. In fact, they showed laptops in the video. Let me show you.
And today's lecture is on the cosmological argument.
Did you see that? There were like 4 laptops showing in the classroom before they cut to the main character handwriting notes for some reason. God, I hate handwriting.
You'll also see lecturers when you have termly personal tutor meetings.
Wait, I thought this was a day in the life, but now we're talking about a meeting that happens once per term. So that's like 2 or 3 of them per year, depending on the university. I haven't looked up this place. So why is that in a day in the life video? And it gets worse.
By the 3rd year, you'll need to do a dissertation. This is an independent research project, the topic for which you can choose.
You can choose the topic as long as your supervisor approves, who you can schedule meetings with if you ever want to see them. That's what the video actually said. But anyways, this is a project that you do in your 3rd year, but it's in a day in the life video. What the hell? That's like once per degree kind of project? Maybe there's a senior one too. So it's like once or twice for your whole degree. That's even more rare than termly meetings.
And that was a day in the life of a philosophy student.
Just in case you doubted what the video was about, I wanted to show you that clip. Alright, here's one more part.
As well as ask any questions you may have concerning the text you're required to read for the seminar. These include some of the best works of philosophy you'll ever come across.
Your required reading will be some of the best works of philosophy you ever come across. Why do you think that might be? Maybe it's because it's all you ever read. You just read what's required, and then ask just enough questions about it to pass the tests. Or write passing essays, which involves more figuring out what the professor actually wants and thinks himself than, truth. So this video was not very satisfactory. Let's try some other ones.
Soren Kierkegaard.
I'm not a Kierkegaard fan, but I'm not a fan of most of the people these videos cover. Let's try and keep an open mind and see what it's like.
He tells us, "As I grew up, I opened my eyes and saw the real world, and I began to laugh, and I haven't stopped since. I saw that the meaning of life was to get a livelihood, that the goal of life was to be a high court judge, that the brightest joy of love was to marry a well-off girl, that wisdom was what the majority said it was, that passion was to give a speech, that courage was to risk being fined $10, that cordiality was to say you're welcome after a meal, and that the fear of God was to go to communion once a year. That's what I saw, and I laughed."
Kierkegaard thought he saw some problems with the world. Did he solve them? Did he come up with better ideas? No, he laughed at people. What a jerk. How do you even call something a problem or worthy of ridicule if you don't have a better idea? Where's the attempt at reform? And did you see that wisdom tooth? This guy is so try-hard to make a popular YouTube video and get the audience to like him that he's trying to put images everywhere to entertain people who don't care about his content. And that's pretty normal, and usually people put things up that are somewhat reasonable, but a wisdom tooth to represent wisdom, that's ridiculous. That is not suitable for a philosophy video.
"Marry and you will regret it. Don't marry, you will also regret it. Marry or don't marry, you will regret it either way. Laugh at the world's foolishness, you will regret it. Weep over it, you'll regret that too. Hang yourself, you'll regret it. Don't hang yourself, and you'll regret that too. Whether you hang yourself or don't hang yourself, you will regret both."
What a bunch of nonsense. How would you even regret it if you hanged yourself? You can't regret things when you're dead. Anyway, here's the punchline.
"This, gentlemen, is the essence of all philosophy."
The essence of all philosophy is to complain about life and to believe that you're fucked no matter what you do, so there's no real point thinking about it because life is lose-lose. So philosophy is worthless and can't get you a good life. Seriously? I don't know if that's supposed to be a paraphrase of Kierkegaard or if it's the video maker talking, but either way it's bad. If it's Kierkegaard, it disqualifies him as a philosopher. And why is he in the video? And that makes the video maker dumb. If it's the video maker, well, he's still talking about Kierkegaard's point of view, which seems to be dumb. And also it disqualifies him as a maker of philosophy videos to think that about philosophy.
Kierkegaard loathed the Christianity of the established Danish church, but he adored the simple truths of the Gospels that his father had taught him as a boy. For him, Christianity was a religion of extreme surrender to a theology of almost peasant-like simplicity. One was to be ready to die for Christ, to give up all attachment to worldly things, and to love all humans like one's siblings.
Kierkegaard was not an original thinker. He accepted a peasant-like simple version of the Bible. Okay, why are we talking about him?
Kierkegaard wasn't interested in justifying his attachment to Christianity through rational means.
Okay, apparently we're throwing reason out. No reason. So why are we talking about this guy? Where's the philosophy? Where's the rational thinking? The attempt to figure out the mysteries of life or anything like that? He just laughed at life, refused to think, refused to use reason. Why pay attention to him? What's the value here?
Instead, he recommended a dramatic and now famous leap of faith, wherein one wouldn't apply one's puny mind to attempting to prove the existence of God. One would merely switch off one's faulty rational faculties and jump into the idea of God as the total solution.
Can I take a leap of faith that Kierkegaard is totally wrong and worthless? I don't need to. I could argue it, but I wanted to point out how self-refuting his approach is. You could just do it with anything, including rejecting what he said.
As he put it, to have faith is to lose your mind and to win God.
How is this man considered a worthy thinker to make philosophy videos about? Let's move on. Let's try some educational material. This promises a crash course in philosophy. The first episode is going to tell us what philosophy is.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace.
I wasn't expecting that. All right, moving on.
Why do you do what you do? Why do you think what you think? Why do you feel what you feel?
I was hoping you'd start by telling us what philosophy is. Instead, we have some questions like this. These are not representative of the core topics of philosophy, like, what do you know? How do you know that you know it? How can you be sure? Or if you can't be sure, how do you know your knowledge is any good? Or other types of questions are, what is the good life? How do you live a good life? And there's questions about what exists and how do you know it exists? Not quite like physics where they, look at the atom and decide that electrons exist. But in the bigger picture, how do you know anything exists? How can you tell? What criteria should you use for deciding your view of reality? Physics only applies once you already have a view of reality. You already think your microscope is real. And then you look at things that you think are real and you learn more about them. It's for investigation. It's not for the most fundamental first principles, like philosophy is.
If I'm not truly free to make my own decisions or choose my own actions, then how can I be held accountable for them? Yeah, it's gonna be that kind of journey.
Wait, what the hell? What kind of journey is he talking about? He makes it sound like an annoying, frustrating, bad journey or something. Like he doesn't like philosophy and he thinks you don't like philosophy and you're gonna sympathize with that? And this is the introduction to a set of videos teaching philosophy? What the hell, man?
Rather than just looking at the world and describing what we see, we'll be evaluating it.
Are you normally mindless? Do you not evaluate and judge? Is philosophy just thinking for you? Philosophy means thinking, means evaluating, judging, having opinions, not just taking what you see at face value as a given, but actually trying to think about it. And then the alternative, when you're not doing philosophy, is you just don't really think, don't really use reason. Is that it? Is that the difference? Is that what philosophy is about? Is just thinking itself? That wouldn't be the worst definition, but I don't think it's quite how he meant this. It's sad, though, that you have to actually tell people, hey, we're gonna try to think about things. And that's actually different than what they usually do.
We will take nothing as given, set our assumptions aside, or at least try really hard to, and do our best to see the world as if we've never seen it before. And for what it's worth, we'll also be talking about Batman and what Dick Grayson can teach us about the concept of identity. And we'll learn how The Matrix can help us understand the life and writing of René Descartes.
Alright, so setting our assumptions aside sounds nice, or at least trying. But is he actually going to try? Or is he just going to assume that philosophy is boring, Batman and The Matrix are fun, and he needs to entertain his viewers with little graphical distractions and movie comments? Is he really trying to take nothing as given and see the world as if he's never seen it before when he starts bringing up Batman and The Matrix in socially normal ways to try to entertain people who he has assumptions about? No, he's not. He's not doing what he's preaching. Lectures like this undermine themselves so frequently. It's not just that he doesn't use philosophy in his life, which is why people think it's useless. Even the teachers don't actually get value from it in their daily life. He can't even stick to it during the actual scripted lecture about philosophy.
Also, we'll try to answer unanswerable questions and puzzle over paradoxes that have plagued geniuses for thousands of years. It's gonna be hard and enlightening and frustrating.
Our philosophy teacher says that we're going to think about unanswerable questions, try to answer them. Presumably we're going to fail, and that's why he tells us we will be frustrated and it will be hard. And this is supposed to inspire us. This is the best he can say about philosophy. Paradoxes, unanswerable questions, difficulty, frustration, failure, basically. The message here is failure. We're not going to succeed. We're not going to figure things out. Geniuses have failed. We're going to fail too, and not have a good time even.
Scholars were tangled up in a distinction they were just beginning to make between philos and mythos, or what we'd now roughly call science and storytelling.
The assumption that he's making, and that all his listeners will make, even though he told them not to, is that science is good and storytelling is not so good. Storytelling means fiction, it means myths. However, as the philosopher Karl Popper explained, learning can start anywhere, even with myths. Myths are a perfectly good place to begin thinking. The important thing is error correction. What do we do with our ideas? It's not how do we create the ideas, did we use the scientific method, or did we make up a story? It's how critical are we of the ideas? How do we evaluate them? How do we check them for mistakes? There's no way to avoid mistakes in the first place. Science cannot accomplish that. That's a common misconception. What we can do is look for our mistakes and try to fix them.
When the earliest philosophers used the word philosophy, they basically meant the academic study of anything, which, I guess could include golf.
Studying anything is not a very helpful explanation, and that's the second golf joke.
Studies that had strong empirical elements came to be considered science, a search for answers. But philosophy came to be understood more as a way of thinking about questions. Big questions. And today, 2,500 years after the ancient Greeks first brought them up, philosophers still love asking questions, oftentimes the same questions, and they don't mind that they never get an answer.
This is so wrong. Philosophy is about creating answers, solving problems, figuring things out. It's methods of doing that, and you're supposed to actually do it. You're supposed to use it in life. You're not just supposed to say, oh, here's a bunch of big questions. They're unsolvable. We have no idea. We're just going to keep pondering over them for fun. Philosophy should not be a useless intellectual game. It's a practical discipline. This video, supposedly teaching philosophy, is attacking philosophy. This guy is an opponent of philosophy, or at least his scriptwriter is. Why is he even making this video? It must be because, despite all the attacks on philosophy like this, there's still some respect for it, some interest in it, and he's chasing the views? Or maybe he buys into his own propaganda. Maybe he's given up on answers, so he actually is satisfied with screwing around and not having answers. Whatever it is, the video goes on to present confusing questions with confusing non-answers. It's not a very good video. It fits the introduction. Let's move on to the third video in the series about how to argue.
Deductive arguments are great because they give us certain answers.
So he's teaching infallibility. You know those really tough philosophical questions that he thought have no answers? Like, how can we know something for sure? That one has no answer because it can't be answered. There's no way to do it. No one's ever figured out a way to do it, and there's logical arguments for why it's impossible. That doesn't mean there's no answers to the questions that matter, like how do we learn things. There's just no answers to certain misguided quests, like the quest for infallible omniscience. Well, despite the lack of answer, he decided, hey guys, we got it, we got certainty, done, no problem.
Deduction requires a fair amount of general information to give you a specific conclusion that is, frankly, probably kind of obvious.
Deduction not only grants us omniscience, it lets us figure out what's obvious, and that's about it. It's kind of useless. What a weird point of view. And what a discouraging point of view to people who are learning philosophy. Why learn something that lets you figure out stuff that's kind of obvious? What's the point of that? Is there value there? There are ways to think about that and see value in it, but he doesn't explain them. He just makes it sound like it's not useful. So why is he teaching it, and why are we listening to him?
You also need to take what you've experienced before and use that to predict what might happen in the future.
Except that's logically impossible. What you've experienced in the past, any finite data set, is logically compatible with infinitely many future patterns, correlations, predictions, whatever you want to call it, theories. So there's no way to do that. And this has been published and well known for decades. And the better people in the field at least recognize that there's this huge problem here. They think induction works somehow, but they can't explain and argue it. They don't just go around saying, oh, well, you just do this. It's that easy. You know, they recognize that there's at least some sort of significant issue. But this guy is not saying, hey, induction has these huge problems. He's just saying, hey, you just do this every day. He says you already know how to do it. You do it all the time. It works great. That's all he says. There's no critical thinking. There's no questioning his assumptions about induction. There's no approaching the topic as if he didn't already know that induction works great. And there's no doing his research and actually finding out about the topic and introducing us to different points of view. You know, he could have presented it as an ongoing debate and said, here are some of the different arguments, which would have at least been neutral and more fair. But instead, he just says some naive stuff and doesn't really think about it or go into any meaningful depth. And I already watched the rest of the video when I said this, so it doesn't get better later on.
You can also come up with better, more skillful arguments and counter-arguments, which are some of the most important maneuvers in the philosophical game.
Philosophy is just a game. Don't bother. It's not about truth. It's not about reason. It's just for fucking with people in arguments. If you get good at the game, you can outmaneuver them. That's it. That's what he thinks. That's what he's teaching. He's taking a dump on philosophy.
So you believe that this aspirin tablet will cure the headache you have right now because countless aspirin tablets have cured countless headaches in the past.
Apparently, naive, enumerative induction is all there is to know. That's what he's teaching. No nuance, no attempt to deal with any of the problems with induction. Just if you count a bunch of something, that makes it true. That's how you learn. It's like he hasn't read philosophy. He has no idea what's been said about this topic. Like, even the inductivists who actually look into this topic have better ideas than this. What's wrong with counting a bunch of instances of something? And the more times it happens, the more likely it is to be true? Well, first of all, what is the same thing? First, you have to have an explanation of what instances you will count as the same before you can start counting them. So you already have to be able to think and argue and logic and reason and whatever before you could even do this. So then, assuming we're already intelligent, we can already think and so on. So there isn't really any role for induction left anymore because we've already explained how we think and learn and so on. You know, we don't reason by induction, we reason by that other stuff, and then maybe induction comes later. At that point, we somehow figure out certain things are the same. And then, okay, we count them, and if it happened a bunch, it's going to happen again? Really? No. We reject that all the time. Some things we expect to keep repeating, and some things we think won't repeat. Some things we prevent from repeating. We're like, well, that mistake has happened 3 times. We're damn sure not going to let it happen again. We take steps to prevent it. So you have to consider things like, is this a natural phenomenon? Are humans interfering? What really lets you understand whether something will happen again is an understanding of why it happens. The classic example is the sunrise. Will the sun rise tomorrow? Well, that depends on whether the sun goes supernova or not. When will the sun go supernova? You have to understand that the sun is made of like hydrogen and helium, and it's a nuclear reaction, And then if you figure out what's going on there, then you can take measurements of it and you can figure out when it will stop rising. So that's not induction.
For example, most men in ancient Athens had beards. Socrates was a man who lived in ancient Athens. Therefore, Socrates probably had a beard. This is an inductive argument.
This is not an inductive argument. He hasn't actually read the history of induction and looked at what it means. It's dumb enough to be an inductive argument. It's kind of similar to one, but it's not actually attempting to engage with the meaning of induction in philosophy.
But there's also a problem. The future doesn't always resemble the past, and every pattern has its outliers. So induction always has the potential to produce false results. Aspirin might not work on a really bad headache.
He admits induction isn't perfect, but he glosses over what the issues are, so far. There's one confusing section where he tries to actually talk about a more serious problem with induction. It's really confusing. I'm going to play it for you. But then where he goes from there is a complete letdown. Supposing you understand it, you'll see that there are actual fundamental problems with induction, where just in the general case, it leads to contradictions, and it doesn't guide you in what to think. And what is his answer to that? It's going to be just this. Induction is pretty great, but it's not perfect, so sometimes we'll use something else. There's no actual paying attention to when it does and doesn't work, what the domain of applicability is. There's no trying to figure out, when we can and can't use it. It's just, let's fudge everything, use it most of the time, and then sometimes not use it. He doesn't take seriously the nature of the problems with it and what their implications are. He doesn't really care. He's just saying, well, this philosopher, Nelson Goodman, he played the philosophical game. He had some pretty good maneuvers. He made some arguments. By the way, what kind of arguments were they? Were they deduction? Were they induction? Were they something else? There's no attempt to take these categories, deduction, induction, abduction, etc., and actually apply them to the world. He presents arguments and then he doesn't talk about the things he just said, what category are they? But these categories are supposed to be how we reason. He says this is how we think about things. He gives examples that fit his categories conveniently. They're cherry-picked. I mean, they're not actually correct, but they seem plausible. He picked examples where it seems to work okay and make reasonable sense. And then with the harder case, like his own Nelson Goodman Grew example stuff, he just doesn't think about it. So watch this. See how confusing it is. See if you find this very educational, or if you just get kind of lost. Because I totally understand if you get lost. I don't think I could follow this if I didn't already know what it said in advance.
Contemporary American philosopher Nelson Goodman confronts the problems with induction using a thought exercise about a hypothetical substance called grue. According to Goodman's scenario, grue is anything that's the color green before a certain time, a time that we will call t. And another property of grue is that while it's green before time t, it's blue after it. Now let's assume that we're living in a time before t. T could happen 100 years from now or tomorrow, but we know that all the emeralds we've ever seen are green. So inductive reasoning lets us conclude that all emeralds are green and will remain green after time t, since emeralds have never been known to change color. But all emeralds are grue because it's not yet time t and they're green, which is part of the definition of grue. So we have no choice but to conclude that emeralds will be blue after time t arrives. Now we've got a problem, because inductive reasoning has led us to conclude that emeralds will be blue after time t. But inductive reasoning also tells us that they'll remain green. Goodman's riddle reminds us that inductive evidence can be flawed or contradictory. It can make you think that you can predict the future when, of course, you can't. So there are times when you need to get at the truth in other ways.
Did you catch all that? Do you think you could explain it to someone else by yourself without referring back to the video in your own words and actually answer all of their questions, arguments, and doubts? I doubt it. However, in his own words, he basically admits induction leads to contradictions. Does that make him curious? Maybe induction's an error. Will he reconsider induction since it leads to contradictions? Will he figure out in what cases induction does and does not lead to contradictions? Will he try to categorize it as which ones are the valid inductions and which ones are the invalid inductions? Not at all. Just forget about it. Use it whenever you feel like it. And whenever you feel like it, just say, oh, well, induction's not perfect, and use something else. There's just no interest in reason here. So I'm done. Moving on.
When I was a student, they actually stimulated and promoted people to study philosophy. They gave you a whole extra year of finance if you would double major.
This is STINE JENSEN, who likes it when the government spends the taxpayers' money so that some favored citizens can spend more time at university and learn things the government approves of them learning, which is really disturbing to have the government playing favorites about what ideas people have.
I think it's important because children grow up now in an age that is very confusing, very hectic, has enormous problems. There's hardly any space or time to really reflect.
Life's hard. People don't have time to reflect. Things are too hectic, chaotic, and confusing. So we should encourage people to sign up for some of the most confusing university classes in existence and double major in 1 extra year so that they're super, super busy. Their life is super hectic and chaotic, and they have no time to reflect. Really? That's it? That's your theory? Did you put any thought into this? That's so contradictory. Wait, did you take philosophy courses? Is that why you're dumb? Are they just that bad? That's what they taught you to think? Like, did you pay any attention to what you're saying? Life is hectic, so people should be encouraged to double major? Double majoring is hard and hectic. Hello? How do you get interviewed?
That's incredible.
Incredible.
Oh, I get how she gets interviewed. She's a suck-up. She's praising her society. She's praising the government. And when people say things to her, she's super compliant. This guy says something incredible. What does she do? She jumps to agree with him. She echoes his words. She says it's incredible. You just do that all the time and people agree with you and like you and stuff. You don't really exist. You know, you're just a mirror of the people around you, like Peter Keating in The Fountainhead. But you don't read books like that and you don't think about things, so whatever.
And especially at a time now when there are student loans and there's such a push to get students and kids into the work.
Here she is saying yeah 3 times. This is a very short interview. It's 90 seconds. She doesn't even know what he's saying. She just starts jumping in with yeah before he really gets to his point. And then when he starts to finish, yeah. She's empty-headed. She complies with those around her. And she tries to replace her own self with theirs. But they do it too, so everything's empty. What's the solution? To actually learn philosophy. Not the kind at the government-funded university courses, but the kind where you actually think about things. And you stand up to things and challenge ideas instead of just saying yeah.
And if you build this in from a young age with children, if you train it as a habit.
She wants to train critical thinking as a habit. Build it into children from a young age when they don't know how to dissent and you're just indoctrinating them. You can't indoctrinate people with critical thinking. That's a contradiction. Thinking can't be a habit. That doesn't work. You know, you can conform by habit like she does, or you can reason as an active thinker who isn't living habitually, who's taking things as they come and actually dealing with the current situation instead of going by previous habits.
A society where they will have to share. You cannot have it all. You will learn how to share. This is very difficult. So you will have to train a skill called empathy because it doesn't come by itself. It doesn't come naturally.
Sharing and empathy. Really? We already try to teach kids that at a young age. There's a huge emphasis on those things at a young age. We're already trying to indoctrinate kids with those, push them on kids. And her idea is, we should just teach kids philosophy, give them time to reflect during their double major so that at a young age they can learn to share. Like, first she was talking about college, and now it's a young age when kids are learning to share. And she doesn't have a new idea. It's just teach conventional values to kids better somehow. That's it. If only kids would think more, they would agree with us and learn the things we want them to believe.
You will have to think about why is sharing important.
Her idea of critical thinking is you consider why sharing is good. Not is sharing good. You wouldn't consider that. You don't challenge the status quo. You just think more about how to agree with the status quo. That's her life, and that's what she wants for all children, including your children. And she wants the government involved in pushing that lifestyle and that conformist mindset on everyone.
And to think about what society do I really want to live in.
Figuring out how to agree about sharing and empathy, in her view, is considering what sort of society you want to live in. You don't get to consider different types of society. You just get to agree with this one, and then you're seeing why you want to live in it or something. I don't know. Can I live in a society without her? Is there a way we can do that? It's not really her, though, because there's millions of her, and she doesn't matter. She's not a unique snowflake. She's just another person who blends in. She's not a leader. She's not a pioneer. She doesn't really matter. What matters is the universities, which are creating people like this, the cultural institutions, which are indoctrinating children to be like her, the government, which is tax funding being like her. I want to live in a society with philosophers, with real critical thinkers who question things instead of just rushing to comply with those around them, rushing not to have a self, to be mirrors of other people. I want to live in a society like in The Fountainhead. Well, not exactly like the book, but the sorts of ideals that the book was advocating. I want a society where you can type philosophy into YouTube and find something good.